Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts. Today we have Michael Tsarion joining us. Hi, Michael.
Hi, how are you doing, Esoteric? Nice to be with you, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you. Could you start by telling us about yourself?
Oh, well, from Ireland, and I've made several trips to the United States where I'm based, and just from about 1990, well, my public career really started about 98 in a slow way, and took off from there in the kind of a conspiracy movement. But my work was always a little bit more eclectic than that. So following in the footsteps of certain previous people, but then sort of branching away into my own thought and going much deeper happened just about 98 and afterwards. But the research I've been doing on almost any of the subjects that I've been into goes back to the 70s. This is a strange thing. My interest in Ireland, for instance, starts about 79 and gathered speed about 81, 82. Now, I'm talking about really primitive understandings, mostly unlearning, mostly sifting through what already has been written. No concept of adding anything, just absorbing the knowledge. And then one of my trips to the States was in 91, actually, sorry, late 89. And then, look at the things that were happening in the world at that time, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the alleged end of communism. Yeah, I wish it was, right? But you also have Desert Storm, this whole other fiasco that's taking place. So this is when I was meeting a lot of veterans in the streets of America, California, going to work. These people would be on the buses. These people would be at the bus stations and hanging around. And I like these guys. I have a thing for soldiers, And these guys had gone through the whole nightmare of the psychiatric treatments and the VA hospitals, and they were in a desperate condition. But these fellows would accost me, we'd talk, and then they'd whip out a dollar bill or whatever and go, "Do you see what that says? New World Order?" And I said, "Yeah, what of it?" So then I got the slow education, and then they would recommend books as well. And the good thing at that time in America is you could go and get those books. It was just that lineman between, shut down. But actually, you could go into a regular bookstore, and if they didn't have it on the shelf, this would be something like the San Jose Metaphysical Bookstore and others like that. And if they didn't have it, they'd order it for you, even if you brought in a little private catalog and said, "Look, there's a bit of a taboo catalog, a taboo publisher." But at that time, you could actually order these, and you could also order videotapes and things like that. So that's what I and a friend did. And by God, if it didn't start a massive learning curve into all sorts of things, you wouldn't believe, the filing cabinets we had and the subjects we were into. But it progressed, and finally, toward the end of the 90s, I was so well versed in these things and other subjects as well that I thought, it's time to start writing things down. Published in 2002, came out my first book, Atlantis, and it's the best-selling book. People love it because it, although it's about aliens and genetic manipulation and the history of the planet, it's really about evil, and it gives you a completely unique interpretation of why evil is in the world, what it is, and how it really got here. It's about that, and that's a theme that's run through a lot of work, right up to female Illuminati. It's always in things I'm doing, but it's the heaviest there. I really bring out the heavy guns, and it worked because who do we normally look to for that question? That is any questions of morality, not philosophers, even though there are people called moral philosophers. No. When we're talking about ethics and morality, we're looking to the Christian church. Why? Because they set themselves up as the arbiters of that. They said, "We will tell you, about God and Satan and the fall of man, and you just leave that to us. And you're the ones coming to confession once a week, so you just leave it to us to explain good and evil." Okay, we'll do that. What's the explanation in 2,000 years? Absolute rubbish. So my book opened with a saying, let's turn the tables, and let's look to see if there is another explanation, however flimsy or whatever. Let's search the world for an alternative explanation. Well, don't do that, because there's millions of, the ancient world had a lot to say, specifically the ancient records, apocryphal works, but even the works going back to Sumeria, the ancient, my own race, whatever, the Nordic or the Celtic, they have a lot to say about it. Heavily illustrated, beautiful works on the coming of evil into the world. So you end up discovering a whole new archive in the ancient myths and legends. Now I decided, look, Zachariah Sitchin and other writers have done a lot on the Middle East. I'm not going to rehash that again. I'll just stick with my own Irish tradition and show the parallels there. So taking a basis of somebody like a Zachariah Sitchin, I said, I'll be the Zachariah Sitchin, so to speak, who talks about the Western myths, the Western legends of Ireland and Britain and all of that. And that was it. And the theme behind it, of course, is again to explain evil. And then I think the very next book was Irish Origins. It's a double volume, again, sort of looking deeply into the alternative history of Ireland. And then after that, because the muscles have been so flexed to write this mammoth text, it's a double volume, the book Astro-Theology, and the content, we'll talk about that a little bit later here, but that book came out, was written fairly quickly because you studied it all my life. Wanted to do an homage, you see, to Gerald Massey and others. And because the muscles had already been flexed with the previous book, there was a lot of energy residual. And so that book probably was the fastest one to come out. And I wanted to really do justice to that subject because although others people were speaking about it, I could see it's not their fault. It's just that, they didn't know enough about continental or Middle Eastern history. And I even have an Astro-Theology Zone website, which people can go to as well. That's extremely comprehensive. There's loads and loads of extraordinary information there about the history of Judaism, because the history of Christianity goes back to Judaism. Yeah, but people stop right there, with the great patriarchs. They don't go forward. They don't go backwards even further to understand Egypt, Persia, Babylon. All these places that the so-called Jews were held captive must have had an influence on them, did have an influence on them. You know it from reading the Nativity story. That's not Christian, and it's not even Jewish. So there's a point. So then, from that point on, it was probably around about 2009, these books were sort of finally coming out. And then, it's just been following those trails until today. But on my own podcast, we've not done anything on Astro-Theology since the beginning. Don't know why. So when you called, it was like, oh, great. Finally, somebody's interested in this subject, because it's been neglected, even in my own work and on Slave podcast. We just haven't had time or the inclination to get into it. And you have to do that with somebody who already knows a little bit about it. We've had Ralph Ellis on and everything, but usually Astro-Theology, again, just comes in for a second and then, we move on to other things that he's been into. So it's sad in a way that, a subject of such importance, sidereal astrology, whatever you want to call it, gets waylaid. It really should be always kept in the narrative.
And in saying that, can we start by talking about the hidden origins of Christianity and what is it really based on?
What a question. Of course, there's many answers to that, but I think all religion, and this is quite demonstrable, even a cult, even a weird Mooney's cult or Jim Jones cult, we have this heroic figure. You don't really have a religion. Think of even Hinduism with your Krishnas and your figures there, the Buddha, Arjuna, even God, Brahman. They're all heroic. They all wield bows and arrows and thunderbolts and swords. That's all pretty heavy, Hollywood stuff right there, and it'll captivate the mind. And when we talk about a hero, I mean, that's an endless story. So just, the Celtic mythologies have it, the Nordic mythologies, think of Thor, think of Odin. So there's one definite origin of religious thought, and that is the hero. Sorry, excuse me. And then you can think of the Bible or a text or a chronicle, even a Gnostic chronicle. They've got your Ialdabaoth and Sophia, So it's a description there. These books are the story of Ra, the story of Amun-Ra, right? And the story of Marduk or Sargon, And this is great. We're still into it. Look at the Marvel comics, and not just them. So there's a heroic aspect in which we want to tell the story of the hero. And the hero starts, of course, with something very, very earthy, our father, the tribal leader, the chieftain, He wears the lion's tail. He's the lion of the tribe, the shaman. And these are the keepers of wisdom. These are the keepers of our tribe, our elders. They know what the elder. I don't know what the elders did. I couldn't tell you, but the elder of our tribe knows what the elders of the past did. And so these are people who keep away the beasts. These are the people who got us to where we were. These are the guys who will go out to fight in their sort of, chariots when an enemy appears. So this heroic figure is as old as time. Even Carl Jung called it the animus, the warrior, the king archetype. And so religion can be understood in one way as giving a further story, imaginative story, because then, of course, if we're talking astrotheology, what happened? That hero figure, very earthy figure, not a perfect being, but this, think of the Aztecs and their worship of their leaders, and the Egyptians were all faces bow before the great pharaoh, all these rituals. Then we took that figure and projected it upwards, along with a lot of other figures, but just let's focus on this one for a minute. The hero gets blasted up there in the sky. He's Butes. He's Orion. He's the Hercules. He's the hunter. He is the Hercules of the 12 challenges, or the 12 great rites of passage. So that's what a Jesus is. That's what a Muhammad is. It's really that simple. It's a description of a hero, and that's why it's wild and fantastic. If Jesus did something to 1,000 people, well, Muhammad had to do it to 15,000, right? And so on. And you can clearly see that this is the case in these scriptures. If it was this many people crossed the Red Sea, no, it was the star. They were like the stars in heaven. There was a 500 million. And then, the scholar with even an IQ of 50 can tell, don't think so. Where's all the food scraps? Where's all the onion peels? Where's the banana skins? Where's the toilets? I think we need to reduce this stuff. But the point is, that's the heroism. That's the storytelling and the myth mongering. And it is absolutely everywhere. And we don't have far to look, because there's a thing called the Holy Bible, which is the greatest exegesis on myth mongering that you could ever want to read. There all is laid out from the Hebrew Bible onwards, the millions of people that followed God, the millions who crossed the river, the millions who did this and that. Millions? What are you talking about? Simple demographics tells you impossible. Millions with all of their animals going with them and all of this nonsense, right? So it's total myth mongering. But what do we know about myth mongering? We just read it, we accept it, millions bow to it, and wear it around their necks, and nobody uses their reason or their logic to say, it's just impossible to breed that many people. I don't care if it was Abraham or Joseph or Jacob or whoever, Judah, whoever. It's not possible. They left no record. Then you simply realize that's what it is. On one level, the heroic figure, Noah, he's heroic. You could throw tidal waves at him. You could throw tsunamis, but him and his little boat, they survived. What a story. Cecil B. DeMille, right? But then on a much more profound philosophical level, to answer your question about religion, whether it's Christianity or not, is this extraordinary philosophical fact that ancient man was very up close to the mystery. And there's really no other word for it. You could call it sublime if you wanted to, and it would be quite right. But we're locked into our little cages of our cities. They were not. They were there with the thunder and the lightning. They were there with the earth, up close to the earth. Their survival depended on being very up close to nature and animals and their ways. And they're also living in nature. They didn't have cities. And so one origin of religion is just the giant mystery. When you look at the mystery, you find it's really big. Right? You look at it's not just mystery, it's a giant mystery. Look at the cosmos. Look at the universe. Vaster than any mind can hold. And their little minds at the time, like our minds right now, couldn't grasp it. And so that then caused awe and wonder. But wherever there's awe and wonder, there's also fear and trepidation. This is, slowly going to the answer to your question. That mystery isn't just beauteous, it's also frightening. Think of a child's mind going out and looking at the Grand Canyon, a child's mind going and looking at the roaring ocean, and then being told there's horrible monsters in the sea. Don't go in there, you could be eaten or whatever. You could be drowned. So wherever there's a majesty, and wherever that sublime exists, think of Marco Polo. If you actually read a lot of the documents of the first pioneering travelers and discoverers of lands, they're actually telling you right in there that they were filled with fear. Exactly at the moment when they were also contacting the beauty. It's right there phenomenologically in their works. So there's something about the great mystery. We've insulated ourselves from it. So modern man doesn't know what I'm talking about, because we live in these cities where the lights are so bright and they're kept on day and night, you can't even see the stars. So there's no mystery anymore. But in those days there was, and it was frightening to a degree. It brought awe and wonder, but it also brought a feeling of trepidation and sort of anxiety almost. It's very strange to say that, but the sublime, the beautiful, the awesome also strikes in us a kind of anxiety, because we can't find where it's plugged in. The anxiety arises because it is so majestic and so vast, but I'm just little old me, right? So something about our urban life is indicative of this, because it's a wall that keeps us into these nice cages and our superlit TVs and our little, plot, our garden that needs to be mowed, and the job and the cubicle like buildings, right? All of this is in a way a response to the majesty, to the transcendent, and to the intense. The intense experience frightens. Now, of course, what's happened, another thing that's indicative of this is our life would become, our urban lives, our social lives would become so dry and desiccated if we still didn't have the mystery. So what do? We're in an ambivalent situation toward that great mystery. Well, I know. Sure, they got a whole bunch of dispensers down in the Amazon jungle. You could just put your coin in, pull a lever, and you get some ayahuasca trip. Jesus, that's sublime. That's brilliant. So if you watch the imbecility, right, of what we do to take shots of the sublime at the bar, and we never confront, why did we build that city? Why do we want this sublime in piecemeal? Because it's what's called negentropia. The universe is negentropic, self-sustaining, self-creating. And we can't find where that's plugged in. Everything in our world is finite. Even the light will burn out, a bulb, a candle, right? A torch. So we can't find where the great mystery is actually plugged in, because we want to patent it. We want to control it. So our urban bubbles, these gulags that we live in, are the simulation of that. It's born out of the will to power to own and control that which is ineffable and eternal. So religion, then, a long-winded way of explaining your question, we're doing that. Religion is another vehicle of the will to power. The mystery is now personified as God. He's male. Or we had the Great Mother, and then we got the serpent worship, and then we got Krishna, and then we got Buddha, and then we got it's all an attempt to anthropomorphize the great mystery, which is to then bring it to be subject to the will. And even in primitive times, this was a particular active thing. So to me, that's the origin of religion right there. Not much good about it, actually, because what would have been good is just a direct encounter with the sublime and the mystery, period. But cognition was changing, right brain to left brain. There's many answers to this. Urbanization was taking place. And then there was an ancestral trauma that is the root of all the things we're talking about. So if you have to add a third thing, then it is the most important thing, which is that something happened to actually compound the breach between man and nature. And that was, the planet being devastated by heavenly bodies. And it was almost like, to say it simply, nature, you've hurt me, now I can hurt you. Or at least, nature, you are my ground and you've shaken the shit out of me. So, okay, that means that we have an antipathy now. And I mean this quite literally. In consciousness itself can be understood as an antipathy to nature based on physical events that took place. It's a whole study in itself, and I get into it in the Atlantis book. And so that antipathy, that crack that existed, that severance, gulf between man, or consciousness, and nature, is also one of the reasons for any kind of religious thought. It's really a falling off that caused it.
So going back to the Old Testament, where we have so-called slaves leaving Egypt, funnily enough, with enough gold to build a golden calf. What is so special about the symbol of the calf that they built?
Oh, yes. Well, you see, this is a discovery that has really intrigued people. And the best guy who explains it, you've had him on the show numerous times, Ralph Ellis. because when Ralph's work came along, it was like, did somebody just leave the, Aladdin's cave open or whatever? Because I'd been having these questions since the 70s and paying quite special attention to those that weren't answered. After reading very, very widely from all the greatest scholars you can imagine, and the list is endless. Well, as far as I was concerned, some things weren't answered correctly. And then in the mid 90s, or actually late 90s, when Ralph's books started coming out, it was just like click, 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 done. Now, okay, there's a few other guys out there to be credited as well. Tony Bushby, it's not that he was the only one that nailed it, but he is by all standards, the preeminent answer giver to some of the more, there's Moata Ashby is a good writer. It's not to say that there hasn't been very, very great people out there helping nail certain things and giving you that desperate insight that you needed, There are many, but it's just towering. His work is towering. People should have every book he ever wrote. So he describes this in astrotheological terms, which immediately gelled with me. Suddenly it made absolute sense why they did that. Why the golden calf and not the golden bunny or something, the camel. No, it was a bull because something was taking place in that exact era chronologically. And that was the movement of the sun from the sign of Pisces, from the sign of Taurus into the sign of Pisces. And Ralph brilliantly shows you how that incident, which had been predicted when it actually hit or when it was happening, caused a major rift in Egypt because the psychopathic king Akhenaten took this to complete heart. I mean, he just wanted to completely transform Egypt from the worship, not just of the bull, that just represented a cult, the cult of Thebes, the cult of the Amonists. And Amonists are actually a very interesting group when you study them. I actually call them Druids. And I actually, in my work, show you that the Ammonists and the Druids were one group, spread internationally over the world. The Ammonists knew about the Druids, and the Druids knew about the Ammonists. This is one of the most extraordinary things about it, because ultimately it was a cult, and that cult was worldwide. But along comes the Akhenaten cult. They were kind of floating around, but they didn't have the budget, so to speak, before that. In Akhenaten, he said, right, this is it. I'm taking this obscure cult of my fathers, and we're going to go to town with it. And so disturbed the status quo in Egypt that basically Egypt was, on the brink of destruction. It's an amazing story, this. In fact, it's even more amazing when you realize that the Exodus in the Bible actually refers directly to this. It refers to two different Exoduses, but this is one of them. When Egypt got fed up with Akhenaten and threw him out. And when they threw him out, his tribe leaves. Whether he was dead or not is a bit dodgy, right? That can never be ascertained. My feeling is he was dead. But as they go through the wilderness, in my narrative, it's his daughter that takes over, but maybe that'll be too big a story. So they go through the desert. They put up the brazen standard. They put it up because little serpents are biting them. I think we're getting into the realm of Cecil B. DeMille again, but they cross the Red Sea, the Pharaoh's charging after them. But long after that period, they're starving in the desert, they're going through, and then he has to put up this sort of apotropaic totem. And that's an incredible story that I go into in the Female Illuminati presentation, which is on Unslaved, what that really is all about. It's absolutely incredible. But one incident where they talk about is that they had to do this because little snakes were pestering them and biting them. So by putting up the standard, they would ward them off. As you said earlier about the numbers and the various coded symbolism, little snakes does not mean locusts, little snakes, or anything else. It's a symbol of something. It's a term that was used from one cult to the other. All right, it's not much different when they cross the desert, get to Sinai. And by the way, Sinai, as Ralph Ellis will tell you, is just another euphemism for the Great Pyramid. So again, as I say, clickety click, 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 click. And extra important for somebody who's been slaving in the mines, trying to work out all of this stuff and just can't make this, can't make it, can't pull out of the river, the fish. So Ralph's work is, again, as I say, preeminent. Anyway, he goes on to say that then as Moses ascends the mountain, and that's all to be taken symbolically, can be related to stars, related to the sun. Well, anyway, the famous story is down they are, they're the holy people with all its gold and silver, the slaves Yeah, slaves normally do carry a lot of cash on them, actually. Have you haven't noticed that? And yeah, they can have a few billion in gold, and yeah, that's the story, right? No worries there. Don't complain about that. Don't ask anybody to explain. Well, they start getting orgiastic, right? The holy people don't want to do anything with Jehovah anymore, right? So they start building this big calf, and it's not restricted to what Ralph Ellis says, but by God, it's one of the chief explanations. It's just simply that they're regressing to the age of Taurus. Priests amongst them said, things are happening bad because we're, okay, even if there is this age of Aries coming, it's later, like we've got today with the age of Aquarius. We shouldn't be so quick to defile the gods. Now, the king Haremheb, the pharaoh at the time that they had just defied and left, he was known as the Great Bull. So on a secondary level, the bull is to celebrate Haremheb. Hey, we don't really hate you. Don't come and slaughter us. Hey, and maybe some of us are even going to go back. So this is what it was. It was a totem, a little bit of the middle finger to Moses, who was Akhenaten. Say, yeah, I don't think we're going to go with your nonsense. You've just led us into a wilderness. So maybe we're going to go back to the worship of Haremheb. And, in those days, you raised a totem or you raised a flag or an emblem. And so you have that. All it represents is one more of the endless rivalries between these cults, or as we might say today, tribes. But tribes bullshit. Anybody who knows the Bible and the word tribe comes up, it's nothing to do with tribes. It's to do with cult divisions. The many priestarchies and sub-priestarchies that existed. Many of them were female. So who is Zipporah then? Can you read Zipporah different, Moses' wife? Can you read Salome different? Can you read Miriamne and Herod's wife and all of that? Can we start, well, no. What about Mary? Who the hell is she? Well, Ralph dug her up, but I guess the cameras are turned off at that point. Yeah, we don't want to know about who she really was and the French connection and all of that. So they're lies, right? But Taurus is an age lasting approximately 2,000 years. A new age was coming, and the Akhenaten Atenists said, let's prepare early. In a way, that's quite sensible, isn't it? And if you're enthusiastic, the word, I think one of the words enthusiasm or whatever, is phallic. It brings up this idea of being, urgent and ready and prone. And so they want to say, we're going to welcome in the sun into the sign of Aries now, and we're going to do it without any contradiction from any of these other plunkers. They're dated, they're dusty. And so in their ardor, right, they wanted to set the age of Aries up. But the Theban Ammonists were too strong, and the people didn't like Akhenaten's desecrations anyway, and so it failed. And so it had to go out into the desert, as they say, but that really is another euphemism. Deserts, the first usage of the word desert is purely astrotheological. That's why every culture has that motif, by the way. It had nothing to do with causing a physical desert. And pharaohs who are whose wealth is beyond the dreams of avarice, don't usually cross deserts as paupers. That doesn't quite fit. No, they're welcomed in every other country outside Egypt as absolute royalty. There's kings will get off their throne to let a pharaoh sit on it, say, well, we're just satellites of your great, and this was the case. This hasn't been told to people. But as far away as Italy, as far away as Greece, the pharaoh of Egypt was the god of all gods. Make way for the god of all gods. And it wasn't any different with Akhenaten. Right? He could go to Persia, he could go to Babylon, and if not sit in the king's chair, at least his family was considered like a duke. Absolute aristocracy. All heads bowed to these men. There's no crossing the desert and going, can we eat some spiders and locusts, please? They're just delicious. No. The whole story is bogus. It's something completely different than people have been led to believe.
Michael Tsarion, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.